Let's pause there. You know, in politics, we get this a lot. Politicians never really want to give you the straight answers. Today, we're going to be doing a breakdown of a video of me questioning the Ottawa Interim Chief of Police, Steve Bell, about the Ottawa convoy protests back in February. Let's start watching the video now. In Ottawa, during the protest clearing operation, were any loaded shotguns found in the trucks of protesters?
Mr. Chair, what I can indicate is throughout the protest, we did receive information and intelligence around weapons. As a result of the clearing, at no point did we lay any firearms related charges.
Let's pause there. So really interesting, you know, going into this committee, I wasn't sure what the answer to this question was going to be. But what I thought was really interesting is that generally when the police or the RCMP make a gun bust, whether it's one handgun or 50 assault rifles, they tend to want to do a big media press release about it. And one thing that was really curious looking back at the Ottawa protests was that we never ever did see a notification that there were firearms found. And we saw there was a Toronto Star news article on March 19th that said that a police source had told the journalists that loaded shotguns were found in the vehicle. Now, I asked this question to the interim chief of police because I wanted to get it on the record. Yes or no, were firearms found when the police were clearing the protest in Ottawa? And I think the chief was somewhat embarrassed to answer this question because he said there's no charges been laid to date. But he did confirm that no firearms were found during the protests. Let's continue going on further here. I guess yes or no, interim chief, were loaded firearms found in the trucks during the protest clearing operation? Yes or no?
So as I indicated, Mr. Chair, there has been no charges laid to date in relations to weapons at the occupation site.
It's just a clear question, interim chief. Like, were weapons found? Like, were loaded firearms found? Yes or no?
So, in relation to no, not okay. To.
Let's stop there. You know, in politics, we get this a lot when we ask questions in the House of Commons. You might have seen question period, and politicians never really want to give you the straight answers. And in this case, I think the interim chief is really struggling because, he's on the spot and I'm asking him a yes or no question and he's really trying to avoid it. But he did just confirm that no loaded shotguns were found at the protest, which I think is very interesting because, we've seen from levels from police sources, from the media, from even members of the government claiming that, the truckers were committing acts of arson, that they had found firearms. And yet when we really delve down and ask the questions and look for the evidence, we're finding out that the story's a lot different than what we were told. Let's continue. On March 19th, this past Saturday, a reporter, Justin Lang, wrote in the Toronto Star, quote, that police sources indicated that loaded shotguns were found in trucks at the Ottawa protest. Is this false information?
So I'm unfamiliar with the quote you're referring to, but as I indicated before, we received intelligence information, continue criminal investigations, and no charges have been laid to date in relation to firearms. Okay, let's pause there. All throughout these protests and in the aftermath, Justin Trudeau and the government have been saying, misinformation, disinformation is a threat to our democracy, that the truckers were spreading lies and that the protesters, that they were spreading misinformation. And yet we see that in the media, that the media in some cases was also spreading misinformation. We see this media story where they said police sources told the journalists that loaded shotguns were found in the vehicles. Well, here we have the interim chief of police, the person who is in command of the operation in Ottawa, and he can't corroborate this evidence. So, you can bet that if police had found guns, that this interim chief of police would have known about it, and he would have given us a clear yes or no. He would have been able to say, yes, that firearms had been found, but he can't, and so he doesn't want to answer that question. Let's move on. But the article claims that a police source told journalists that loaded shotguns were found in trucks during the protest clearing operation, and you have said to this committee that that is in fact not the case, that loaded shotguns were not found in trucks during the protest clearing operation. So thank you for the question. Mr. Chair, as I indicated, We received intelligence information. I'm unclear around the source information that was received for that article or the corroboration around it.
Let's pause there. So the chief is saying, the reason I asked this question is because we had members of the government, members of the cabinet that were retweeting this information that the chief can't corroborate, that police sources were saying that loaded shotguns have been found. So we have members of the government that are spreading what we have now proven to be misinformation or unproven allegations. And I think the fact is that if they had found anyone with a firearms, charges would have been laid, public notification would have followed, and everyone in the country would have been aware that there were firearms. The fact that no public notification was made leads me to believe, well, I think definitively, that there were no firearms found in the first place. And so I think it's very interesting that despite this total lack of evidence, we still have members of the media and members of the government who are trying to spin this tale that there were all these firearms in downtown Ottawa, and yet we've never seen a shred of evidence to back that up. Let's continue.
So there would have been public notifications made.
So we had a cabinet minister, the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, Mark Miller, retweeted that article from Justin Ling from the Toronto Star, claiming that there were loaded shotguns found in trucks. This is misinformation, Chief, and I submit to the committee. Misinformation being spread by a journalist and misinformation being spread by a member of this government. And I'll just close my remarks and give my time to Mr. Shipley. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Interim Chief. Let's end there. So, unfortunately, as members of the committee, we have limited time. And I thought that this question, when I first asked it, it was going to be a simple yes or no. Were there firearms, yes or no? And so I told my colleague that I was only going to take about 2 minutes with this. But when the chief wasn't able to answer the question, it looked like he was being evasive. I clearly knew this was going to be a lot longer than 2 minutes. And so, unfortunately, we as parliamentarians, we don't always get all the time we want to ask the questions. But I think for those of you that were watching, I think it's pretty definitive what we saw. What we saw is that, we had allegedly police sources telling media that firearms had been found. We had members of the government retweeting information that firearms had been found. We saw police intelligence claiming that they had evidence that firearms were coming into downtown Ottawa, that foreign funding was flooding in, that it was overwhelmingly foreign funding from dark web sources. And yet, every time we've asked the experts, whether it's GoFundMe, whether it's the chief of police in this case, every time we've asked them to corroborate all of these claims, they haven't been able to. In fact, they've debunked these claims. So I'm really pleased to be able to share this video with you. I know a lot of you you're busy working, you're in your jobs, you're in school, you're taking care of your families. You don't always have the time to know how things are working in Canada's Parliament. And so if you're interested in watching more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel, comment on this page, and I'd like to continue doing this series to make Parliament a bit more approachable for regular Canadians. So for today, I'll say thank you for watching and see you next time.